Ladies and gentlemen, the following is an excerpt from Chapter 11 of Lines in Winter, the Montreal Canadian Chronology, published in 1986 to great acclaim. Now, this is a breakdown of a certain change of NHL powers. In Philadelphia on a warm September Sunday in 1975, the 21st it was, the Canadiens' minds were on the Bull, Lefty, Mike the Hammer Schmidt, and the Philly juggernaut that was thick in the fight for the National League East Division crown. As well, a young coach from the West Coast named Dick Vermeil was proving that fanatical dedication to the work ethic would soon forge championship contenders of his NFL's Eagles, and improving 76ers were readying for another National Basketball Association season. In the spectrum across the street from Veterans Stadium, the Stanley Cup champion Flyers, aka the Broad Street Bullies, were warming up for a season of mayhem on the ice and a run at their third straight championship. Tonight's exhibition game would be the return engagement of a weekend home-and-home with the Habs, a powerhouse in the waiting, which was just might be ready to challenge their supremacy. Accordingly, the Flyers had bumped and battered the Habs during a 5-4 win at the Forum and the Saturday night encounter. There were 21 penalties handed out, including majors to Dave the Hammer Schultz and Montreal's feisty sophomore, Dougie Risebrough. Schultz added insult to injury when he scored the winning goal, tipping in an Ed Van Impe shot with less than 3 minutes to go. Now, exhibition game notwithstanding, a message had been delivered. The cup is ours. If you want it, you'll have to take it away from us. Love, the Philadelphia Flyers, R.E. Clark, captain. Risebrough became embroiled with Schultz after the Philadelphia winger had abused newly appointed team captain Yvon Cornway, as Henri Richard had retired in the off-season. Now, he hit him with a cross-check that reinforced the message on a more personal note. Guy Lapointe read it loud and clear. The heavyweight rear guard came to his captain's rescue with some of the nastiest threats against the Hammer's personal well-being one might ever hear from a distance of 20 feet or so and over the heads of two linesmen and referee Brian Lewis. Now, after the game, William Scott Bowman congratulated his young centerman for his temerity and his good sense. Risebrough had tackled Schultz from behind, secured a solid headlock, and hung on for dear life, and then began making clucking noises at some of the larger physical specimens filling the Canadiens' home whites. What follows is a recreation of Scotty's lecture. Young Douglas weighs only 177 pounds, soaking wet, and a trainer suspects he has batteries in his pockets when he climbs on the scales. He said, his voice deceptively soft. There are others in this room, however, in the interest of team unity, will remain nameless, but who tend to be a lot larger than 60 feet tall and 200 pounds in weight, without batteries in their pockets. Again, to protect the innocent, I must point out to these same anonymous types that the gentlemen from Philadelphia love it when someone like Mr. Schultz cross-checks our captain into the ice and our people waggle warning fingers at said honored opponent. I wish to leave you with the question to ponder as we fly south to the wonderful state of Pennsylvania. What do you think the Flyers would have done if one of our players, heaven forbid, dared to even reserve such treatment for their captain, a certain Robert Earl Clark? Now, that evening at the Spectrum, the Canadiens teams that skated out in road whites for the warm-up was noticeably larger than the team that had worn the home whites the night before. In the lineup were healthy young red meat eaters with names like Sean Brian Shanahan, 6'3", 205, Glenn Michael Goldup, 6 feet 187, Pierre Butch Jr. Bouchard, 6'2", 202, and Rick Raymond Chartrand, 6'2", 210 pounds. Now, late in the third, Montreal led to the 6-2 when young Risebrough pondered a question posed by his coach at the end of the previous evening's meeting. As he and Mr. Clark skated back to respective benches, they began exchanging pleasantries. Not content with simple expression of intent, they dropped their gloves and had at each other. As the two young men tussled, the answer to Mr. Bowman's question was delivered to the person of Schultz vaulting the boards and racing into the melee. He was joined by all of his teammates, and Risebrough was joined by all of his. In the words of the great Stephen John Shutt, a much better goal scorer than historian, we kicked the living daylights out of them. Now Schultz, who would end the evening with trios of penalties, three each of minors, majors, misconduct, was intercepted by Chartrand and two replayed a first period set to, score Chartrand 2, Schultz 0. Mr. Jack McElhargley was thoroughly drubbed by Mr. Bouchard and left to sputter, I'll get you for that next game. Never at a loss for words in Canada's two official languages, Bouchard opined, as a low probability of such an encounter, "I'm not worried you'll be in the minors by then." Now, Mr. Gary Dauerhofer, a.k.a. High Cheeks, for his habit of obscuring the vision of opposing goaltenders in the crease, in all senses of this word, was being throttled by a large Canadian in front of the Montreal bench. For Pete's sake, Scotty, he implored, "call him off. I can't breathe." Meanwhile, the aforementioned McElhardy had separated himself from Bouchard with the help of overtaxed linesman, and encountered Mr. Goldup. Alas, it was not be McElhardy's night. Even notorious non-combatants were involved, including Jimmy Roberts and Bill Barber, Guy Lafleur and Mel Bridgman. Guy, of course, discovered he was a lover, not a fighter. Mario Tremblay and the same Mr. Bridgman, who in turn discovered to his chagrin that young Mario was a lover of fighting, and he all the way back to original twosome, Clark and Risebrough. The referee for the encounter, Mr. Bruce Hood, assessed some 322 minutes and penalties for the entire contest, 250 of which was the result of the bench-clearing festivities. 5 of those went to Andre Moose Dupont, the former junior Canadian who thumped William Scott Bowman during the melee. I figured this was Scotty's idea all along. He fumed after the pretend game was over. Mr. Schutt, the amateur historian, reflected on an unconscious encounter a decade later. "We won the Stanley Cup that night. It just wasn't official until next May. If you're going to beat the Stanley Cup champions, you have to beat them at their style because they dictate the game. Philly was a tough team, so I had to prove that we're tougher to break them mentally. And even if we didn't win all the fights, which we did anyhow, they knew that fighting us was not going to help them." Now, sitting in the dressing room after the game, a lot of guys were smiling. We knew we had them. Better still, they knew it too. And once you beat them at their style, you could impose your style on them, and we knew you could never skate with us. Bowman, also assessing the impact of the exhibition game played 10 years earlier, agreed. "The Broad Street Bullies played their style of game and used it effectively. I will never think of criticizing their team makeup or the job Freddie Shero did, because as a coach, you go with what you have. And although Dave Schultz and I have had our disagreements over the years, I could not criticize the style of play. You had to give him credit. He played 9 years in this league and came out of it with 2 Stanley Cup rings. He did what he had to do. We just had to find a way of countering what the Flyers had going for them. 8 months later, spotting Rick Chartrand and Pierre Bouchard as forwards, the Canadians swept the Flyers 4 straight in a relatively tame series. Sam Pollock's team in the 1970s had arrived and was well on its way to 4 straight titles and a raft of league records. If ever Sam Pollock's draft movement bore fruit, it was what the team he assembled in the 1970s. The 68 and 69 drafts ended an era which with the disappearance of territorial protection. However, that did not prevent Sam Pollock from assembling an impressive cast of homebrews. The 75-76 team comprised the following players: goal, Michel Buddy-Larocque, Ken Dryden. Defense, John Van Boxmeer, Guy Lapointe, Serge Savard, Larry Robinson, Don Henry, Pierre Bouchard, Rick Chartrand. Forwards, Jim Roberts, Dougie Risebrough, Guy Lafleur, Yvan Lambert, Yvan Cournoyer, Mario Tremblay, Glenn Goldup, Ron Andruff, Murray Wilson, Pete Mahovlich, Doug Jarvis, Steve Schutt, Bob Gainey, Jacques Lemaire, Sean Shanahan. All but Dryden, Ori, Lambert, Mahovlich, and Jarvis were obtained in the draft, or, in the case of some of the veterans, came up through the ranks of the team-sponsored junior squads. Dryden was originally drafted by Boston. Ori was obtained in a trade from St. Louis. Lambert was originally a Detroit draft pick. Mahovlich was obtained in a trade from Detroit, and Jarvis from Toronto. Now, in a 4-year Cup sweep, players would come and go. Additions would wear at least 1 Stanley Cup ring, including Billy Nyrup, Brian Engblom, Réjean Houle, back for the WHA, Pierre Mondoux, Gilles Lepierre, Pierre LaRouche, Pat Hughes, Rod Langway, Cam Connor, and Mark Napier. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the story of the greatest dynasty of all time, which basically got its major influence in a series of 2 exhibition games in the Philly Flyers in late 1975, and the rest, as they say, is history. From failing hands, we throw the torch. God bless Montreal. God bless the Habs. Les habitants sont là. Na, hey, goodbye. Have a great evening, and the Lions in winter will never fade. Every winter, Montreal has the Lions, win or lose. Thanks for listening. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. Bye.